dust of the frontier territory had a way of settling on everything, but it could never dull the pristine precision of Isaac's ledgers. For decades, his ink-stained fingers tracked every penny, flowed through the valley's largest cattle enterprise. He was a man of quiet dignity, whose honesty was as unshakable as the granite peaks looming over the settlement. But success in the territory always drew eyes, some filled with admiration, and one pair clouded with bitter envy. Elias, a rival clerk who envied Isaac's spotless reputation and the absolute trust the town placed in him, saw an opportunity in a brief period of economic shifting. With practiced malice, Elias meticulously altered a series of secondary ledger books, planting a trail of phantom losses and missing funds that pointed directly at Isaac. Within weeks, a quiet whisper turned into a roaring accusation. Isaac, who had given his youth to the development of the valley, suddenly found himself branded a thief, stripped of his position, and facing total ruin. His daughter Isabella was away in the capital when the news reached her. She was a young woman built of frontier grit and refined intellect, completing her final terms in legal studies, a rare path for a woman of her time, driven by a deep-seated belief in justice. Dropping everything, she packed her trunks with law books and returned home, not with tears, but with an unyielding determination to clear her father's name. The frontier courtroom was stifling, packed to the doors with townspeople who had once called Isaac a friend. Isaac sat at the defense table, his shoulders slightly curved, but his chin held high. His hands, though weathered, were steady. Isabella stood beside him, her dark formal attire a stark contrast to the dust-hued clothes of the spectators. Elias sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing a smirk that he barely bothered to conceal. He believed the trap was foolproof. The altered ledgers were already entered into evidence. Isabella turned to her father, placing a hand gently over his. "They see ink on a page, father," Isabella whispered, her voice rich with a calm, comforting warmth. "But I know the man who held the pen. We are going to show them the truth." "My future begins with honoring your past," she replied, squeezing his hand before stepping out into the center of the courtroom. The prosecution's case relied entirely on the physical ledgers and the testimony of Elias, who claimed to have discovered the discrepancies by pure chance. When Elias took the stand, he played the part of a reluctant witness perfectly, sighing heavily as he looked toward the judge. "It broke my heart to bring these numbers forward," Elias said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But the math doesn't lie. Isaac was the only one with access to the primary safe and the daily logs during the months the funds vanished." Isabella approached the witness stand. She didn't carry the aggressive swagger of the territory's usual trial lawyers. Instead, she moved with an analytical grace that made Elias visibly shift in his seat. "Mr. Elias, you claim the discrepancies began in the late spring, correct?" Isabella asked, her voice clear and resonant. "The records show exactly that," Elias replied smoothly. "And you have testified that my father was the sole custodian of these specific books during that entire period. He never let anyone else touch them. Ask anyone in the office." Isabella picked up a heavy, leather-bound volume from the evidence table. She didn't open it to the pages of numbers. Instead, she held it up so the natural light from the high courtroom windows caught the binding. "A ledger is more than just columns of figures, Mr. Elias. It is a physical object, bound by a specific craftsman using specific materials," Isabella stated, turning to face the judge. "My father is a creature of absolute habit. For 20 years he has purchased his ink and his binding glue from the same local apothecary. But this specific ledger, the one containing the fraudulent entries, tells a different story." She walked over to the witness stand and placed the book directly in front of Elias. "If you examine the spine of this book, the adhesive used is a synthetic compound only imported from the Eastern Rail Line starting 3 months ago. My father was bedridden with a severe bout of fever during those exact 2 weeks, a fact our town physician can verify. You, however, were running the office entirely on your own." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Elias's smirk faltered, his collar suddenly seeming far too tight. "That proves nothing," Elias stammered, his knuckles turning white against the wooden railing. Anyone could have ordered that ledger. Perhaps, Isabella countered, her eyes locking onto his with absolute intensity. But let us look at the handwriting itself. The numbers are beautifully forged to look like my father's script. But my father suffered an injury to his right wrist in his youth. When he writes the number 8, he always draws the top loop counterclockwise to avoid the stiffness in his joint. Every single ledger for 20 years reflects this. She opened the book to a heavily altered page. The person who forged these entries drew every single number 8 clockwise, a habit of a completely different writer. A habit, Mr. Elias, that matches your own personal notebooks perfectly. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic swell of voices. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but the truth had already broken through the room like sunlight through a storm cloud. Isabella did not look at the crowd. She kept her gaze fixed on Elias, whose face had gone completely pale as he realized the meticulous trap he had built had become his own cage. Human psychology is a fascinating thing, Isabella said softly, just loud enough for Elias to hear. A man driven by envy focuses so much on the prize that he forgets the small, honest habits of the person he is trying to destroy. Within an hour, the shifting tide of evidence was undeniable. The judge ordered a formal review of Elias's personal quarters, where the actual missing funds were discovered hidden beneath the flooring, along with the practice sheets used to mimic Isaac's handwriting. The case against Isaac was dismissed entirely, his name completely cleared before the sun had even begun to dip below the western horizon. As the townspeople poured out of the courthouse, many stopped to offer hushed apologies and warm handshakes to Isaac. But the old clerk kept his focus entirely on his daughter. A week later, the owners of the territory's largest trading and cattle syndicate officially announced Isaac's appointment as the chief superintendent of territorial commerce, the highest administrative post in the region, carrying immense responsibility and respect. Elias, stripped of his position and his standing, was sentenced to a lengthy term in the territorial penitentiary for fraud and perjury. On a quiet evening, Isaac and Isabella sat on the front porch of their homestead. A hearty supper of roasted beef and garden vegetables cooled on the table inside. The valley was silent, peaceful once more. They offered me a grand office in the brick building downtown, Isaac said, looking out over the plains. But the best part of this high post is knowing that the law in this territory is in hands like yours. Isabella smiled, leaning her head against her father's shoulder. The law is just words on paper, Father, until someone puts a heart behind it. We did this together. In the glow of the twilight, the frontier felt vast and full of promise, a place where integrity, backed by fierce love and unyielding grit, could truly conquer the bitterest of wrongs.